My name is Rosa Martinez, and I'm 71 years old. For over 50 years, I've carried a secret that feels like it's woven into the very fabric of my being, a weight so heavy it's shaped every step, every breath, every quiet moment of my life. Sitting here in my small apartment, with the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, and the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room, my hands still tremble at the thought of sharing this story. It's not a tale of triumph or neatly wrapped redemption. It's raw, messy, and deeply personal, like a scar that's faded but never disappeared. I've kept it hidden, locked behind smiles and silences, terrified of what it would mean for me, for my family, for the fragile life I've built, if it ever came to light. But tonight, I'm ready to let it out. If you're watching this, I'm asking you to stay with me, to bear witness to a moment that changed me forever, a choice that reshaped my soul, and a shadow I've carried every day since I was 20 years old. This is my truth, and once I start, there's no turning back. I was born in 1954 in Millfield, Ohio, a tiny town so unassuming it felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to stir its stillness. Picture narrow streets, lined with clapboard houses, their pastel paint peeling like old memories, porches sagging under the weight of time. There was Betty's Diner, where the coffee was always burnt but the apple pie could make you forget your troubles for a moment. A general store with a creaky wooden floor and jars of penny candy that kids would stare at longingly, and a church steeple that stood watch over the town like a silent guardian, its shadow stretching across the square on Sunday mornings. In Millfield, time wasn't measured by clocks, but by the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought the sweet, heavy scent of Mrs. Henderson's lilacs drifting through open windows. Summer hummed with cicadas and the laughter of kids splashing in the creek. Fall painted the fields in gold and crimson, and winter wrapped everything in a silence so deep you could hear your own thoughts echoing. Millfield was a town divided, split by an invisible line that separated us from them. We were the working folks, living in houses with drafty windows and roofs that leaked in heavy rain, scraping by on factory wages or odd jobs. They were the Maple Hill families, with their manicured lawns, gleaming cars that never rusted, and homes that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Their world was one of white picket fences, cocktail parties, and influence that reached into every corner of Millfield. The bank, the factory, the town council. Crossing that line was like stepping into a foreign land, where every glance reminded you that you didn't belong. My family was rooted on the U.S. side, always had been. We were poor, the kind of poor where you reused tea bags until they were where socks were darned until they were more thread than fabric, where every winter coat came from the church donation bin or a neighbor's attic. My dad, Miguel, worked long, grueling shifts at the tire factory on the edge of town, a hulking brick building that belched black smoke into the sky. He'd come home with hands stained dark from grease and rubber, the chemical smell clinging to his clothes like a shadow. Every night, he'd stand at the kitchen sink, scrubbing with a bar of lye soap until his hands were raw, trying to wash away the factory's mark, but it never fully left. His face was lined from years of labor, but his eyes were warm, and he'd hum old Mexican folk songs under his breath, songs his father taught him in Texas before they moved north for work. My mom, Alina, cleaned houses up on Maple Hill, leaving before dawn with a bucket of supplies and knees that creaked from years of kneeling on hardwood floors. She'd return after dark, her hands rough as sandpaper, her apron stained with bleach and polish. At night, she'd sit at the kitchen table, sipping weak coffee and sharing stories about the lives she glimpsed. Crystal chandeliers that sparkled like stars, marble countertops cold to the touch, bathrooms bigger than our entire living room. Her stories were never bitter. They were laced with a quiet awe, as if she were describing a fairy tale. "Rosa," she'd say, brushing my hair with those calloused hands, her voice soft but firm. "You study hard, Mia. Books are your ticket out. They're the one thing no one can take from you." I was the youngest of three, always scrambling to prove I was more than the baby of the family, more than the girl with hand-me-down dresses and a chipped front tooth from a bike accident when I was 10. My older brother Carlos was the dreamer, tall, with Dad's broad shoulders and a restless energy that made him pace our small house like a caged animal. By the time I was 20, he'd left for Detroit, chasing better pay at an auto plant. His letters home were sporadic, scrawled in messy handwriting, full of promises to bring us up north, to give us a life where we didn't have to count pennies. But those promises felt like distant stars, beautiful but unreachable. My sister, Maria, was the anchor, the responsible one who carried the weight of our family's survival on her narrow shoulders. 2 years older than me, she seemed decades wiser, with dark eyes that saw through lies and a quiet strength that held us together. She helped Mom with cleaning jobs on weekends, never broke curfew, and balanced our family's budget in a worn notebook, her pencils scratching out numbers while Mom cooked dinner. Maria had a way of looking at me, sharp and knowing, like she could see trouble brewing before I could. "You're too wild, Rosa," she'd say, half teasing. "You've got to think before you leap." As a child, I was restless, always chasing something I couldn't name. I'd spend hours at the Millfield Public Library, a squat brick building with dusty shelves and a librarian who smelled of lavender and mothballs. I'd devour books about far-off places: Paris, with its winding cobblestone streets, Tokyo with its neon glow, New York City with its skyscrapers that scraped the stars. I'd sit cross-legged on the library floor, flipping through pages, imagining myself stepping off a train in one of those cities, free from Millfield's smallness. At night, sharing a cramped bedroom with Maria, I'd lie in bed staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of some distant world. I'd trace its edges with my eyes, dreaming of a life where I wasn't just Miguel's daughter, the girl from the wrong side of town. By 20, those dreams were still just dreams. I was waitressing at Betty's Diner, balancing trays of coffee and pie, while dodging the pinches of truck drivers who thought a smile was an invitation. My days were a blur of greasy aprons, burnt coffee, and tips that barely covered the electric bill. But I held on to those dreams, clinging to the hope that I could be more than what Millfield expected of me. That hunger for something bigger led me to a moment that would change everything. One Friday night in 1974, I found myself at a party on Maple Hill, invited by kids from the other side of that invisible line. I was naive, drawn in by the promise of belonging, of being seen as more than the diner girl. The night started with laughter, music, and the thrill of being included. But it ended in a guest bedroom where I experienced a violation that left me hollow, a betrayal of trust that I couldn't speak aloud. The details are too painful to dwell on, and I won't. They're a wound I've carried silently, one that set the course for everything that followed. The next day, one of the boys from that night found me at the diner. I was wiping down the counter, my hands shaking, when he leaned in close, his voice low and threatening. "You say a word, Rosa," he whispered, "and your dad's out of a job. Your mom, too. We'll make sure everyone knows what you are." His words hit like a fist, stealing my breath. I knew he meant it. Maple Hill held the strings to our lives, and I'd seen what happened to girls who spoke up. They were shunned, their reputations ruined, their families dragged through the mud. So I stayed quiet, swallowing the truth until it felt like poison in my veins. Life in Millfield went on, but I was a ghost in my own body. I worked my shifts, smiled at customers, and avoided Maria's searching gaze. She knew something was wrong. She always did, but I couldn't tell her. The shame was a stone in my chest, growing heavier each day. I stopped going to the library, stopped dreaming of Paris or Tokyo. The water stain on my ceiling was just a stain now, a reminder of a life that felt out of reach. Weeks later, my body began to betray me. I woke up nauseous, a bone-deep tiredness settling into my bones. I was late. Panic clawed at my throat, but I couldn't face it in Millfield, where every drugstore clerk knew my family. I borrowed $5 from my cousin, drove to a pharmacy 2 towns over, and bought a pregnancy test. My hands shaking as I handed over the money. In the diner's bathroom after my shift, I locked the door, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and waited, my breath hitching as I stared at the stick. 2 lines. I was pregnant. The world tilted, the edges of my vision blurring. I slid to the floor, the cold tiles pressing against my legs, and sobbed until my throat was raw. I couldn't tell my parents. My dad was proud, the kind of man who'd work 12-hour shifts and still fix the neighbor's sink for free, who carried our family's honor like it was his duty. If he knew, he'd want to fight for me, and the Maple Hill families would make good on their threats. My mom, with her rosary beads and quiet faith, would blame herself for not protecting me. The shame would break them, and I couldn't bear to be the one to do it. I was alone, drowning in a secret too big to hold. I didn't want this baby. I know that sounds harsh, but it's the truth. I was 20, barely holding myself together, not ready to be a mother, especially not to a child tied to that night. Every time I thought about it, about what that baby represented, I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls of Millfield were closing in. I lay awake at night, staring at that water stain, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. What kind of life could I give this child? How could I love them when every thought of them brought back that night? The weight of it was unbearable, a tide pulling me under. I spent days wrestling with my options, each one heavier than the last. I thought about keeping the baby, imagining a life where I raised them alone, but I saw only hardship whispers following us. My parents' shame, a child growing up in a town that would never let them forget where they came from. I thought about adoption, but the idea of carrying this child for 9 months, feeling them grow inside me, only to give them away, felt like a different kind of loss. One I wasn't sure I could survive. I went to church one Sunday, sitting in the back pew, clutching my mom's old rosary, praying for guidance, but the silence from above was deafening. In the end, I made the hardest choice of my life. I found a clinic in Cleveland, 2 hours away, in a part of the city that felt as far from Millfield as another planet. I used every penny I'd saved, $7, scraped together from tips and skipped lunches, enough for the procedure and a round-trip bus ticket. The bus ride was a blur, the scenery outside a gray smear of fields and factories. I sat in the back, my hands clasped tightly, trying to hold myself together. The clinic was a squat, gray building with a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a dying insect. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. The chairs hard and cold, the walls papered with faded posters about health and choices. The other women sat silently, some with heads bowed, others staring blankly ahead, each carrying their own private weight. The nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a voice soft as worn cotton, led me to a small room. She asked if I was sure, her hand resting lightly on my arm. I nodded, but inside I was screaming, torn between fear, necessity, and a grief I couldn't yet name. The procedure took 10 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. When it was over, I felt hollow, like someone had carved out a piece of my soul and left an echo in its place. I walked out into the November rain, my coat too thin, my shoes soaked through, and cried all the way to the bus station, the city blurring around me, the rain mixed with my tears, cold and relentless, as if the world itself was mourning with me. The girl who came back to Millfield wasn't the same Rosa who'd left. I was a stranger to myself, carrying a new kind of weighted guilt that settled into my bones alongside the shame. I tried to go back to normal, slinging plates at the diner, laughing with Maria, sitting through Sunday Mass, but the world felt different. Colors were duller, sounds muffled, like I was underwater. I'd catch my reflection in the diner's coffee pot and barely recognize the woman staring back, her eyes hollow, her smile forced. The whispers started soon after. Someone saw me at the bus station, red-eyed and shaking, my coat clutched tight around me. Rosa's been acting strange. Heard she was in Cleveland, at one of those places. The rumors slithered through the town, reaching my parents through the church pews and the factory break room. They never asked me outright, but I saw the questions in their eyes. The way they studied me, like I was a puzzle they couldn't solve. My mom's hands lingered longer when she hugged me. My dad's voice grew softer, as if he was afraid I'd shatter. Maria watched me closest of all, her gaze heavy with worry, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. The words were trapped inside me, locked behind a wall of fear and shame. The weight of it, all the secret, the stares, the suffocating smallness of Millfield became unbearable. I stopped going to the library, stopped dreaming of far-off places. The water stain on my ceiling was just a stain now, a reminder of a life that felt out of reach. I'd lie awake at night, replaying that day in Cleveland, wondering if I'd made the right choice, if there was another path I could have taken. The guilt was a constant companion, whispering that I'd failed, that I'd betrayed a life that could have been. I'd clutch my mom's rosary, praying for forgiveness, but the silence from above was deafening. A year later, I couldn't take it anymore. I saved enough for a one-way bus ticket to Columbus, scraping together every dime from my tips. I told my parents I'd found a better job, a chance at a new life. They didn't believe me. Parents always know when you're running from something, but they let me go. Their hugs tight with unspoken worry. Maria drove me to the station, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. "You call me if you need me," she said, her voice breaking as we sat in the car, the engine idling. "No matter what, Rosa, I'm here." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and hugged her until the bus driver called for passengers. As the bus pulled away, I pressed my forehead against the window, watching Millfield disappear, the church steeple fading into the gray sky. In Columbus, I started over. I got a job as a secretary at an insurance office, typing letters and answering phones in a gray cubicle that smelled of paper and ink. I rented a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper, a leaky faucet, and a radiator that clanked like it was haunted. The city was loud, chaotic, nothing like Millfield's suffocating quiet, and I threw myself into building a new life from the pieces I had left. I joined a book club at the local library, forcing myself to read again, to find solace in stories even if my own felt broken. I made a friend, Clara, a co-worker with a quick laugh and a knack for baking, who'd bring me cookies and never ask why I sometimes stared out the window too long. I met Paul at the office, a quiet man with kind eyes and hands stained with typewriter ink from fixing machines. He had a laugh that felt like sunlight after a long winter, warm and steady. We'd sit in a park near the office during lunch breaks, sharing sandwiches and talking about nothing: movies, the weather, the way the city never seemed to sleep. He made me feel safe, like I could be myself without explaining the parts I couldn't share. We married in 1978, in a small ceremony at a courthouse, with just his parents and Maria there, her smile bittersweet as she adjusted my veil. We had two kids, Michael and Anna, who became my world, my reason to keep going. Michael had Paul's steady hands and a curiosity that reminded me of Carlos's, always asking questions about the stars or how cars worked. Anna had my curly hair and a laugh that could light up a room, her tiny hand fitting perfectly in mine. They were my redemption, proof that I could create something good despite the brokenness inside me. I poured everything into them, every ounce of love and strength, determined to give them a life where they didn't have to count pennies or feel the weight of an invisible line. But even in my happiest moments, Michael's first steps across our tiny living room, Anna's voice singing off-key at Christmas, Paul's hand in mine during quiet evenings, the choice I made in Cleveland never left me. Every milestone was tinged with a quiet ache, a shadow that lingered in the corners of my heart. I'd see children in the park, their small hands clutching swings or chasing fireflies, and wonder about the baby I didn't have. Would they have had my eyes, my dad's stubborn chin? Would they have loved books the way I did, or laughed like Anna? The questions haunted me, a constant undercurrent of grief I couldn't name. The guilt was a tide that ebbed and flowed. Some days I could push it down, lose myself in my kids' laughter or Paul's steady presence. Other days it crashed over me, pulling me under. I'd lie awake at night, replaying that day in Cleveland, the buzzing neon sign, the nurse's gentle voice, the cold rain on my skin. I'd wonder if I'd made the right choice, if there was another path I could have taken. I'd go to church, light candles, and pray for forgiveness, but the weight never fully lifted. I carried that baby in my heart, a quiet presence I could neither hold nor let go. Paul never knew. I couldn't bring myself to tell him, to risk shattering the life we'd built. My kids grew up knowing they were loved, but they never knew about the shadow their mother carried, the choice that shaped every step of my life since. I tried to be the mother they deserved, the wife Paul deserved, but some days the guilt made me feel like a fraud, like I was living a life I didn't earn. Now, at 71, I'm tired of carrying this secret alone. I live in a small apartment in Columbus, surrounded by photos of my kids and grandkids, their smiles a reminder of the life I fought to create. The walls are lined with memories: Michael's graduation photo, Anna's wedding day, my grandkids' crayon drawings taped to the fridge. I go to church every Sunday, light candles, and pray for forgiveness for the girl I was, for the choice I made, for the baby I'll never know. But the guilt doesn't wash away. Some nights I wake up with my heart racing, feeling the weight of that November day as if it were yesterday. I hear the buzz of that neon sign, feel the cold tiles of the diner bathroom, see the rain streaking down the bus window. In the quiet moments, I talk to that baby. I sit by my window, watching the streetlights flicker, and whisper to them. I tell them I'm sorry, that I hope they're at peace, that I hope they know I've carried them with me every single day. I don't know if they can hear me, but I hope they can. I hope they know I loved them, in my broken, imperfect way. Even if I couldn't give them life. If you're still here, thank you for listening. This is the hardest story I've ever told, and sharing it feels like setting down a weight I've carried for too long. My truth is messy, painful, but it's mine, and letting it out tonight has given me a breath I didn't know I needed. It's not just about Mitz, about every woman who's carried a secret, who's made a choice she couldn't explain, who's lived with a shadow she couldn't outrun. I'd love to know where you're watching from, your city, your corner of the world. Drop it in the comments. Whether you're in a bustling city or a quiet town like Millfield, sharing this story with you means more than you'll ever know. And I believe that passing it on, telling someone else about it, carries a kind of power. It's a way to honor the truth, to make sure it doesn't stay locked away in the dark. So please, share where you are, and if you feel moved, tell this story to someone else, a friend, a family member, even a stranger. It's in the telling that we find strength, that we remind each other we're not alone.